welcome everyone. For everybody who's kind of joined us here this morning, and also people who are watching across the live stream across India. So welcome to the India Employer Forum event hosted by TeamLease. Over the next several minutes, let me share with you the story of India and the transformation that is taking place. Also the context of India and its arrival at global stage. Not that you need to kind of, hear about India and the transformation from me, but it's our perspective of it, and especially the entire angle of people, that we intend to kind of speak about today. As we gather here today, we are at the cusp of an era. At the dawn of its centenary, India is poised to consolidate its formidable position as one of the two largest economies of the world. We are looking at a staggering $35 trillion by 2047. But as we marvel at these numbers, I think it's extremely important for us to keep in mind that along with our growth and aspirations, we have to take care of our single biggest important asset, which is our people. India's journey to economic success is not just about industry or technology. It's about reimagining and optimizing our people's supply chain. It's about recognizing the potential that lies within each individual and harnessing it for the collective growth of the nation. Today, we have gathered here to discuss exactly that, as to how we can look at reimagine and optimizing the people's supply chain. Some of the questions that we're really asking ourselves, and I was actually warmed up, speaking to some of you right before this. Does India have an unemployment crisis? Or does, India have a skilled issue crisis? Does India have a wages issue? Or does India have a productivity issue? What exactly is the problem? Does India have a high attrition issue? Or are we really talking about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we are facing over the next 20 years? One thing I must say that all of us kind of agree upon is the fact that nearly all of our challenges really comes from a single aspect, which is explosive growth, right? And that's exactly what we need to keep in mind as we are kind of, designing our solutions around this. Let us take a step back and understand what's going around the globe. I'm not a big fan, to be honest with you, about macroeconomics, but I think in times like this, it's kind of good to understand, given the sheer number of changes which have taken place over the last 2-3 years, as to what's going on. If you really go by different geographies, I think it will kind of give us a good sense of what's happening everywhere. Let's take, North America as an example, or United States as an example. First of all, I think over the last 3 years, one of the things which has taken place post-COVID, obviously, is the complete disruption of the supply chain. We've all heard about China plus one, so on and so forth. Especially in the US, they had to take certain drastic decisions, right? And some of these that I'm going to share with you will sound like, separate set of statistics, but bear with me for a few minutes and you will see all of them kind of coming together. What's really happened over there? During the pandemic, the US had to disperse what we call in India DBT, right? Direct benefit transfer of $2.3 trillion to their citizenry, right? That's roughly about $1,200 to each adult and about $500 to a child. What happens? There is already, the disruption in supply chain. There is, money which is being thrown through. Obviously, if a lot of money starts chasing goods and services which are already constrained, you're going to lead to inflation, right? And what was the inflation? The US has not revised its minimum wages for the last 15 years. The inflation we're talking about last year, about July, August, was close to 10%, right? It steamed out 8%. Even as of last month, it's closer to 4%, right? It's unprecedented. But that's not the story. These are just statistics. What is the bigger story? In 2021, 41 million people resigned. In 2022, another 50 million people resigned. What is the context? There's the population of the United States roughly about 330 million, right? 167 million are people who are working. So it literally had 2/3 of the people, resigning out of the workforce. There is, in some sense, people can say frustration happening out of pandemic and so on and so forth, but I think there's a bigger thing at play over here, the entire social contract between employer and employee, and I'll come to that in a minute. So that's really the United States. If you look at Europe, obviously there are two wars going on, one which started, last week, but before that, in between Ukraine and Russia and so on and so forth. Of course, the disruption of that has been even bigger for us in one sense. And honestly, I didn't quite know that 20% of the wheat supply really comes from there till about the war started, but that's pretty much, and of course, that disruption has, flown through. Closer, if you look at home, obviously the impact to us is much bigger. if you look at what's happened in China, nearly 1 out of 10 companies have now confirmed moved out of China. Not all of it we have been the net beneficiary in terms of employment growth. It's obviously been the former Tiger Asian economies, which has been Malaysia, Singapore, and so on and so forth, Thailand. But it's benefited us as well. 1 out of 5 companies are also still planning, saying how do they reduce their dependence on China, right? So that's happening as well in a big way. In all this, India is a big bright spot, right? And I think there's a lot of questions going on saying, is what's really changed over the last 10 years? So one clearly is that there are global problems all around. But what's happening to India on its own? Let me give you some specific statistics, and that will let you know saying how things have really changed for us as well, right? If you look at 2011, the number of Indians who had bank accounts, and this is just one metric, it was hardly 44%. If you look at it right now, 2022, it's close to about 80%. Now that's a big change. Roughly about 37 crore bank accounts have got opened, in the last 10 odd years. And no, these are not accounts which have been opened for the sake of being opened. There are about 1,80,000 crores which are deposited into this, and there's a degree of financial inclusion which has taken place, right? It's always good to kind of understand saying how this is impacting, the larger workforce. What about labor per se? Again, when we look at India, it's always the population middle class. You have MNCs kind of, signing up India saying, hey, listen, big opportunity. But let's look at just the labor force, right? So India is about 145 crore population, right? The most populous, country on earth. What is the working age population? The one is typically gets classified from 15 to 59. That's roughly about 90 odd crores. So 145, so remember that's 90 odd crores. What is the amount of population which is really working? That's roughly about 55 odd crores. So if you read Economic Times or any of those magazines and you hear one metric which is labor force participation, that is the number I'm talking about. So India is roughly about 40-41%. What is the formal workforce in that? That's roughly about, out of the 52 crores, roughly about 8 crores. That's us in this room. So 8 crores is the number which is coming from the 145 crores that is really formal workforce. Actually, if you drill down further, it's even more sparse, right? Out of the 8 crores, it's roughly about 3.8 crores which are permanent workforce, right? How do you correlate it back to some of the other statistics that you hear? The total number of people who filed income tax in 22-23, roughly about 7.2 crores. And remember, I'm saying filed, okay? Because out of the 7.2, only 2.8 really paid any tax. The rest were below the income tax. Only 2.8 crores people paid tax, right? If you look at the EPFO data, it's roughly about 6-7 odd crores. People who have even a PF, of any substance, right? Which largely means a large part of our workforce is not formalized. And this is an important aspect because if you really look at from a temporary workforce perspective, let me just give you an example for in the area that we operate, right? Which is contract staffing. The total number of contract workers itself is 1.4 crores. If you look at tri-party contract, that's 42 lakhs. Is it any surprise that the attrition is so high? Because of the sheer demand and growth is all chasing a very small set of people. And that's one of the topics that we want to kind of discuss today, saying why exactly is attrition happening and what is that we are looking at doing to solving it. The second aspect I must point out, which is extremely important for us, the International Labour Organization has pointed out that for most economic development to happen across in large countries, the concept of apprenticeship really needs to take on. To give you an example, out of 10,000 workers, the expectation is anywhere between 250 to 1,500, right? So roughly about 50-odd%. What is it in China for its entire, manufacturing miracle that took place? It's closer to 17%. What is it for India? It's only 7 out of 10,000, right? So amongst many other things, are we really expecting everybody to be, passing out of their high school, getting a graduation, getting a post-graduation before they're going to get employed? The large sections of the population? Perhaps not, right? And I think that's also one of the many problems that we need to look at solving. If you look at some of the reports which are coming out, one of the major reports which came out in July was the Goldman Sachs report saying by 2075, India will be a $52 trillion economy. It will be second only to China, displacing the United States. Now that's a big deal amongst many things. How will that happen? And what does the report essentially point out saying as to what is going to happen? I think they point out on 2 separate things which are going to be absolute key drivers for us. The number one thing everybody is looking at, it's called dependency ratio. right? Which is the dependency of the sheer number of non-working population to working population. For the next 25 years, it's going to be the lowest for us, right? So we have disproportionate number of people who are going to be in the working age population. The second thing which is being spoken about is productivity. Now, productivity, again, we spoke about, labor force participation. But when we speak about productivity, we are really essentially speaking about women participation. Women participation in India is still disproportionately low, right? And that is the aspect which really needs to kind of come along, for India to be really growing. And I'll give you several examples that we are noticing ourselves. 70% of all women who are employed in manufacturing is in the 4 southern states, or the 5 southern states now, right? Largely, women participation is not so much up in the north. So therefore, you see disproportionate number of manufacturing businesses are coming up in south. Because of education, and B, of course, because of education, their employability. So that's also we are seeing which is significantly changing. What does it eventually mean when we say productivity? Essentially, it comes down to saying for every unit of labor and capital, we get disproportionate growth, right? On 2nd and 3rd of August, 2 other things which happened. On 2nd of August, we saw Fitch downgraded, the US sovereign rating from AA plus to AAA. On its own, nobody's really saying US is going to default on its debt or anything like that, but I think it was a significant thing. On 3rd of August, something even more important happened. China got downgraded to equal weight and India got upgraded to overweight, right? And these things are not to be taken lightly because it sends a signal to investors that, India is the place to kind of invest in. So in that sense, you look at some of these reports and you would want to believe saying India has arrived, right? But has it really arrived? Or are we really thinking, in our own terms, in a make-believe world saying we have arrived, right? Let's look at some other statistics we looked at. So one thing is obviously we were 10th in GDP, we moved to 5th in GDP. But let's look at the per capita GDP and where we are. India still is in the 139th position at roughly $2,200 odd, on an annualized basis, right? Even if, some of you are purists and want to look at purchasing power parity, it still doesn't get any better. It gets to 128. So we still have a very low, per capita income, right? Roughly about 2.5 lakhs. And why is that happening? It's the same set of reasons. Poor education, low skills, lack of infrastructure, and all of this needs to come together. So what about our dream of becoming 5 trillion, 10 trillion, and of course, not to mention 2047, if you're looking at 35 trillion, what is going to change? If that has to happen, then you can imagine if you do the maths backwards, it really comes down to each individual, having Bangalore's per capita income, right? What, $11,000 to $12,000. If that happens, we become a $17 trillion economy. Without that, so if just a rough translation, it comes to about 15, 16 lakh rupees. So minimum wages have to go up to that particular limit. And you can't look at wages in isolation. You really have to look at productivity that will lead to wages and not wages going up in its own, which will cause inflation, right? Let's look at the other thing, which is, corporate attrition, which is taking place, right? If you look at global numbers, there's roughly about 14%. If you look at India numbers, it's about 25%. That's for last year. And it's also moderated by the fact that in reality, we are still 55% services, 17% is manufacturing. So manufacturing is moderating that number. Otherwise, in the services part, depending on which business you are in, I think the attrition ranges anywhere between 20-25% to closer to 40%. Unsustainable, I would say. It's simply not possible for us to be able to kind of sustain and be able to grow in that matter, given the effect of compounding which really takes place. Now, the question really is, we ask ourselves is, what is it and why do we need to even debate this? And that's the question we ask ourselves at TeamLease as well. I think it's important to debate because we can't take this for granted. And I'll give you 2 completely separate examples, just to provoke some thought. There is this particular video, which, BBC has shot. And this is roughly around July 1969 when man landed on moon. And there's a set of young people and they take this video and they ask them saying, listen, what's going to happen in the next 50 years by 2019? And you'll not be surprised to hear saying, a lot of those young people saying, listen, we're going to have a colony on moon. We're going to travel on Mars. Nobody spoke about the internet or mobile phone or anything like that. And that really people believed will happen on its own, right? Cut to 2022, none of that has happened in reality. And that's largely because of the fact that nobody put the pedal to the gas, right, to accelerate it forward. We took it for granted that that's going to happen. Now, if that example looks very far-fetched, let me give you a country example. One of the countries with the highest per capita income and better than most European countries in the 30s and 40s was Argentina, right? They were poised to become the first world even at that point in time. But a series of decisions that they took in 1950 completely ensured saying, both from a labor capital perspective, they became what is called a middle income trap nation. They're still amongst the world top 20, but nowhere what they aspired to be. These were all a series of decisions that they took which made them come down this path. Therefore, it's extremely, and that's, by the way, Argentina has roughly 5 crore population. So at a 145 crore population, I think this makes it even more important for us. There is no doubt that there is a promise of India, but I think it's extremely important for us to make sure that we are aligned as to what is required to be achieved. And that's precisely the reason, why we are having this, debate. So the 3 topics Bhavna already spoke about. I look forward, and all the 3 topics are extremely pertinent. The human aspect of human capital, we were discussing just a few minutes back with, some of the speakers are going to speak. I think amongst many things, it is really important to know that while we are looking at a degree of efficiency, I think creativity, aspiration, innovation all comes from individuals, and that is the aspect that we need to look upon focusing as we are shifting from engaging with people only from a mercenary perspective to really look at saying how can they be really productive asset to the organization. The second topic we're discussing around about people in itself, whether they are an organizational asset or they're an asset, or we are really looking at them contributing to the organization as a whole. And the last and most important thing, we're looking at the future of work perspective, saying how are things going to change. I think these topics are specifically designed, obviously, for all of us to participate and us to learn from an eclectic set of panelists. I'm really looking forward, to these sessions, and I'm hoping saying all of you, when you leave today, will at least have 1 or 2 points to kind of think about, as you make your way back to your work life. Thank you so much, and look forward to engaging with you throughout the day.